truth in a world of lies. You are listening to the John H. Project.
Trust no one. Trust no one. Trust no one.
You found it. You're here. You're headlong down the runaway train that is the Anomic Age, and I am your host, John H. Happy to be back with you once again. I'll be taking you to the dark side of the AM by the time you hear this, but fear not. We have a lovely guest today. We got none other than William Federer today, but before we get into that, please check out anomicage.com. Anomicage.com is the best place you can find all things me. PayPal.me/anomicage. Patreon.com/Anomic Age as well. That's the best place you can go to help me. We got the free iPhone app, the free Android app, subscribe by email link, and so much more right there at anomicage.com. So please do check that out before you leave us today. As I always say, you can take me on the go with you. You can take me to the gym, take me to hopefully a lovely get-together with family this afternoon for Memorial Day. So without further ado, We'll get into our guests here. We got none other than William J. Federer. William J. Federer is a nationally known speaker, best-selling author, and president of Amerisearch, Inc., a publishing company dedicated to researching America's noble heritage. Bill has written or contributed to over 30 books and is a frequent guest on television, radio, and podcasts. He produces the How We Got Here video series for TurningPointEd.com. His American Minute feature is broadcast daily on radio and by the internet. His Faith in History television airs on the TCT network. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Bill, for being with us today.
Hey, it's good to be with you.
I can't thank you enough for the time, especially on this Memorial Day. I know you got family and everything to hang out with, so thank you so much for the time, man.
Well, it's great, and it's important to remember those that have given their lives for our freedom. One of the books I go through all the world's history, and I show the most common form of government is kings, or Pharaoh, Caesar, Kaiser, Sultan, Tsar. But power wants to concentrate into the hands of one person, and they rule through fear. And America, we broke away from the most powerful king in the world at the time, the King of England, and we flipped it and we made the people the king. So republics have citizens, and the word citizen means co-ruler, co-sovereign, co-king. So when we pledge allegiance to the flag and to the republic, we're basically pledging allegiance to us being in charge of ourselves. So America is an experiment of a polarity change in the flow of power. Instead of top-down, ruled by the government, it's bottom-up, ruled by the citizens, government from the consent of the governed. There's a great quote from Theodore Roosevelt: "In no other place and at no other time has the experiment of government of the people, by the people, for the people been tried on so vast a scale as here in our own country." But we have threats wanting to flip us back to a centralized top-down, and not just nationally, but globally. And so there's this necessary pushback against globalists and their agenda, and that's where we're at today. But we want to remember and remind ourselves that the freedoms we enjoy are rare in world history, and we have them because of those that went before us willing to give their lives for our freedom.
That's so true, and it kind of irked me. I don't know if it did you, but when the king came a couple weeks ago, you still had, I don't know how to say it. You still had the peasants groveling. The king shows up, and I'm like, what in the world? Did y'all miss it? We're 2026. We're not 1774 here. We don't have to do this anymore. But you had, members of the house and everything just out, praise the king, and I don't know. It just kind of got on my nerves a little bit.
Well, it was funny because all the No Kings protesters sort of disappeared. It's like, where were you?
Where were you guys a couple weeks ago?
I was talking to a Father Calvin Robinson, Anglican priest. He's done YouTube videos. He's a big, tall, black gentleman. You may have seen him on YouTube debating at Oxford. Okay. And he moved to Michigan, and he's pastoring in Grand Rapids. And he told me, I can't go back to England. I'm like, why? He goes, censorship laws. 16,000 people are in prison today in England, some for as little as liking a post or forwarding a tweet. They're in prison right now for forwarding a tweet. And one girl had her friend raped by a Muslim immigrant, and she said that man was terrible. And the police raided her house and arrested her for saying that this guy that raped her friend was terrible. It is totally flipped. And of course, when I wrote a whole book on the history of Islam, whenever they would take over a country, the subdued people were forbidden to insult them. On pain of death. And so when we see Western countries being really careful not to insult them, we're posturing ourselves as already having been conquered. And so anyway, in America, we still have the ability to tweet and like posts, although if you still have people being censored. I just saw a report where some TikToker was comparing the Bible to the Quran, and TikTok permanently banned him. And it's like, wow, we still have this censorship creeping in America. But again, the freedoms we enjoy are rare in world history. They don't exist in North Korea. They don't exist in China. They don't exist in Iran, where earlier this year, 50,000 young people, mostly under 30, were killed by their government. Doesn't exist in Nigeria, where whole entire towns are being wiped out by Muslim Boko Haram. And so, again, we have freedoms in America. We need to appreciate them. And there's a Bible verse that says, a good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children. So if we're really good, we're not going to just sit back and waste away our opportunities. We're going to try to defend and pass these freedoms on to our children.
That's so true. I hope that's what we can see. I mean, you probably saw this as well in the last week. Woman files lawsuit after arrest for Facebook post where she was criticizing in Texas, the horrible water. And I couldn't believe that one. Yeah. And then, and this one's in Florida, Port St. Lucia, where they had an HOA trying to say that you couldn't have guns in the area. You couldn't open carry, you couldn't conceal carry, you couldn't do anything in this HOA. And I was like, good grief. Again, are we back to King George here, where we can't? It's just getting kind of crazy.
Well, one of the quotes that the founders used was, the price of liberty is eternal vigilance. In other words, everybody has to keep pushing back. I think of it as a picnic, and you have barbecue and your blanket, it's out all on the ground, and there's dogs around. And as long as you're there, they'll stay at bay. But if you say, oh, I forgot something in the car, I'm going to leave all this food and then go to my car, it's like, guess what? They're going to come and steal your food. And so you have to be eternally vigilant. You have to keep guarding these freedoms, and it takes everybody willing to push back. I was reading where in Pakistan, like 1,000 young girls a year are kidnapped from Christian homes and forced to become Muslim brides. And then I talked to somebody that works with Exodus 51. There are 4 million Christians as slaves in Pakistan making mud bricks their entire lives. And for $430, you can ransom a Christian out of slavery. Eric Metaxas is a friend of mine, and he works with Christian Solidarity International, and they raise money to ransom Christians out of slavery in Sudan and Mauritania and Niger. And so the Muslim will do the same thing. They'll enslave people even today because Muhammad owned slaves. And so slavery is okay because Muhammad owned slaves. They've never had a 13th Amendment in Islam. They've never had a civil war to get rid of slavery. And since Muhammad owned slaves, they don't see a problem with it. But again, we have a 13th Amendment. We fought a civil war to end slavery. We need to appreciate these freedoms that a lot of people spent a lot of effort to give us.
Yeah, I got to look into the Exodus 51. I was looking at it while you were talking. That looks pretty interesting.
Yeah. I mean, you think of that today, and yeah, the Pakistan situation is I've talked to where Christians can't get jobs higher than a Muslim, and so they'll take menial jobs, and the women will take jobs as cleaning ladies or house servants. And it's sort of typical that the Muslim men in the house can rape them. And then if they want to say, oh, I want to have them as a wife, and if the girl in the family says no, they kill the girl. It's a totally different belief system than the Judeo-Christian belief system. I was talking to a Pastor Greg Young. He's got a radio program. Can't remember the name offhand, but he's out of Texas. And he does a lot of work in India with different tribes. And he says that he digs wells in villages, because if there's a Christian village and there's no well and the women have to walk, they'll get raped on the way to another town's well, and they'll get raped on the way back. Good grief. And he says, if we get to dig a well in their own village, they don't have to go. And it's like, yeah. And it's like, obviously the media doesn't talk about these things, but this is the situation for most of the world and for most of world history. And, I recently, I do as you mentioned, a weekly video for Turning Point Education. We did a 3-part series on the Barbary Pirate Wars. And how Muhammad went from being a religious leader to a political leader to a military leader. And Muhammad robbed caravans. And he had the Battle of Badra, he had 300 defeat 1,000. And he gets verses from his Allah, like Surah 33:50, Allah has given you the slave girls as your booty. And so then they would rob ships on the Mediterranean. People forget, in the year 846 AD, 11,000 Muslim pirates went up the Tiber River and sacked Rome, and sacked the Basilica of St. Peter's, and trashed the bones of St. Peter and St. Paul. It was after that Pope Leo IV built a 39-foot wall around the Vatican. But they would capture Christians and then sell them into slavery in Africa. And so there were Catholic orders throughout the Middle Ages called the Trinitarians, and the head of the order was called the ransomer. And they would collect alms and donations at church services to ransom back your Christian friend that was captured from a Greek island or an Italian coast. Or Miguel de Cervantes was ransomed back. He had been captured. Vincent de Paul, St. Vincent de Paul hospitals are named after him. He was a Muslim slave for a while before he was ransomed. And so you had the European powers would pay annual tribute to the Muslim pirates to leave their country's ships alone. And Sweden, Norway, England, Spain. But when America broke from England, we were no longer covered under the English tribute payment. And so that's when the Muslims began to capture American ships. The Betsy and the Polly and all these different ships, and they would demand tribute. And we were paying 20% of our federal budget to these Muslim pirates. And the day after Jefferson's inauguration, he gets a demand from the Pasha of Tripoli for $250,000 extortion tribute payment. And Jefferson said, I did the only reasonable thing. I sent in a squadron of our ships, Navy and Marines, and it was the Barbary Pirate Wars. And anyway, it's when you get into the history of it, it's like this was the first foreign war after the revolution. And President Obama, in his speech in Cairo, he said, Morocco was the first country to recognize America's independence. It's like, yeah, because they were demanding tribute, because they said, well, you're not covered by the British tribute payment anymore. So it's sort of interesting when you unpeel the layers of history. Yeah.
It's so fascinating because history so often in America is taught is very bland and boring. And at least in public schools, I always say K through 12 indoctrination, college, university weaponization, because that's kind of how it seems to be. But like you said, there's so much history and even so much going on today, like you mentioned, with these Christians still being enslaved and still being raped and tortured and maligned all over the world. But But that's not the media, and that's not the narrative that we get pushed at all in America. That's not on my feed. I don't know if it's anybody else's algorithm is working that direction, because none of that is getting pushed at all.
Yeah, well, they teach history boring on purpose.
Yep.
Because they want people to not know it. It's sort of like the new math. They want to get it complicated on purpose so kids won't learn. It's sort of like switching from phonics to sight read. And in other words, for most of world history, the majority of the people were ignorant. Only 1% of Egypt could read back during the Pharaoh's era. And the scribes spent their whole lives studying hieroglyphs, and it was their career. And they actually wanted to keep the hieroglyphs complicated on purpose as job security. And so when Moses comes down the mountain, he has the law in a 22-character alphabet, not 3,000 hieroglyphs, just 22 characters. First letter's Aleph, second letter Beth. Sound familiar? So easy to learn, kids could read. So ancient Israel was the first instance in world history of a literate population. But for most of world history, it's easier for kings to control ignorant people. And so there's even the last line of the book of Jonah. And Jonah's pouting that God was not destroying Nineveh. And God said to him, well, why should I be in a hurry to destroy him? There's 120,000 people who cannot tell their right hand from their left. We're talking pretty low education level. And so the situation was, as America comes along, and we teach people to read, and then we set up public school systems. It's like, oh, darn, we have an educated populace. What can they do to get the population ignorant again? Teach this new math that nobody can understand. Teach this sight read where they can, only learn 300 characters at the max. They don't know phonics. And then teach history boring on purpose. It's actually a concept called deconstruction, where you separated people from their past, get them into a neutral where they don't remember where they came from, and then you brainwash them into the future you have planned for them. It's a sales technique. If I was a toothpaste salesman, the first thing I'd do is tell you negative things about the toothpaste you're currently brushing with. You're still brushing with that stuff? Haven't you read it? It'll eat the enamel off your teeth. You're like, oh, really? And now you're repulsed by it, and I have you in a neutral position. Like, okay, what are all the toothpastes out there? I haven't been keeping up. Then I can give you my pitch for this brand new tartar control breath freshener toothpaste. So it's sort of a drive neutral reverse. So they go into the classrooms and tell the kids negative things about the founding fathers. They took land from Indians, sold people into slavery. They were chauvinists. These kids are like, ooh, they're bad. Forget the fact they gave you a country where you're a citizen, which means a co-king. You participate in governing yourself. Forget all that. They're bad. And now these kids are in a neutral position where they're open-minded. Gee, let's have a comparative religion class, and we'll start off with Islam, and the semester will run out. We just don't have time to get around to Christianity. And then they give their push for transgenderism and LGBTQism and socialism, Islamism. And so it's sort of you uncouple the train car and then you recouple it. It's a drive neutral reverse. And so Europe actually went through this. It had 1,000 years of Catholic cathedrals, Protestant Reformation, and Jewish neighborhoods. And then it went to a secular Europe with the French Revolution. Free sex, anything goes, tolerate everything. John Lennon's, imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try, no religion too. And so they tolerate everything, and then in comes Islam, and they tolerate that. And it has an aggressive ideology to take over. And so the average Muslim woman has 5 children, and the fundamental practicing Muslims will put their 4 wives in different apartments and tell them to go down to the welfare office and collect checks. And the man visits the wives, and the more children they have, the larger the checks get. And he is living like a prince with his harem, and it's all paid for at state expense. And so they estimate at the rate of population growth that, Europeans are maybe having 1 kid per couple, and this Muslim man is having 20, that, by 2030, they'll be able to sway elections, because they don't need a majority. They just need a couple parties that are neck and neck, and they'll say, well, we'll help tip the scale, but in return, we want you to allow us to advance our agenda. And so they say by 2050, they'll be able to push their agenda and Islamify most of Europe. So to drive neutral reverse. So it went from a Judeo-Christian past to a secular, tolerate everything present, and then it turns into a Sharia future.
I love how you laid that out, in a way that everybody can understand it, because it's really just like advertising. It's like you said, you get a kid in high school and you're not wearing those shoes, are you? As the Nike commercial, you're not wearing those Jordans. You should wear these Jordans. And then, people have this idea that it's very complex and but it's really simplistic. They do it kind of Pavlovianly just to get the slaves to fall in line. I think that's the best way to say it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm writing another book on psyops and psychological operations, and it actually started with marketing.
Talk on that. Go ahead.
So, in the 1800s, you had Wells Fargo wagon, Sears catalog, and they would tell you every detail about a Singer sewing machine, and you would make an informed purchase. But in the early 1900s, you had magazine ads where they would say nothing about a product. They would just make it look like everybody's using it. And then you would feel like everybody's doing it and you want to fit in with the group. Mm-hmm. And the whole marketing, the whole fashion industry is based on this. So it started with Sigmund Freud, a psychoanalyst that studied group psychology and found out that we are group creatures. We want to be accepted by a group, and we fear being rejected by a group. And that simple concept was taken by Sigmund Freud's nephew, Edward Bernays, and put into marketing. And so one of the classics was Crisco. Nobody knew what was in Crisco, but they would do magazine ads with happy families and delicious looking food and make it appear that everybody's using it. They even invented a fake word, vegetable based. Oh, wow. Nobody knew what that meant. And so here they were. They marketed it so well, it put out of business the lard industry. So do you know what Crisco is? It's cottonseed oil. In the deep South, they harvested cotton, and they had mountains of useless black seeds that they would mush into this blacky, mucky oil they would use in factories and machinery. Nobody ate that stuff, but somebody had the idea of bleaching it, called it hydrogenated seed oil or industrial seed oil, and we've all ingested it. So you go from knowing everything about a product, like a sewing machine, to nothing about a product, and you're putting it in your body because you think everybody else is doing it, the keeping up with the Joneses. And so this concept of manufacturing your perception of what everybody else is doing is what Edward Bernays did. And so he even talked about women's shoes. He wrote a book called Propaganda in 1928. And he says, women go into a department store and think they're picking out shoes. They're not. The shoes were picked out for them by the marketing executive who paid the actors to put them on, who paid the photographer to take the pictures, who paid the magazines to print it. The women see it, and it looks like everybody's adopting this fashion, and then they end up, and he says that you simply apply this to politics. And you silence voices that you don't like, and you magnify others, and now it's all done online. That's why they want to censor voices, throttle back your reach and everything, and then magnify other voices so that the typical viewer gets the impression, well, gee, everybody is buying into this. Everybody's getting the vax. Everybody's wearing this on their face. Everybody's going along with this political ideology. And then they feel these are powerful tools. And they use them in classroom. It's called behavior modification or social emotional learning, where they'll celebrate a child if he comes out with an alternative sexual identity, and they'll shame a child in front of the group if he holds old traditional values. And none of the kids want to be shamed, and everyone wants to be celebrated. They all want to be invited to the party and everybody sing happy birthday to them, and nobody wants to be left off the team. And so they manipulate this child's desire to be accepted by a group to push a political agenda. It's called social emotional learning. And then they do that nationally. One of the comparisons I use is World War II prisoners of war and Korean prisoners of war. The World War II prisoners are in barracks like Stalag 13 and Hogan's Heroes, and they were treated bad, but they had their buddies in the barracks. The Korean War, they would isolate prisoners for days, weeks, months, until they just craved another human interaction. They just wanted to be one of the group, be one of the buddies, have a slap on the back. And when they were at this vulnerable, emotional place, they would bring them into a room full of guys who had already caved. And before they could be accepted in the group, they had to reject America. Okay, America's bad. Is America terrible? All right, you're one of us. And it went into their psyche. So even after they were rescued, they still hated America. And so psychologists studied this. And so one of the studies they did was the Solomon Asch conformity experiment in the 1960s, where they would do it on college campuses. They would have pull 8 students into a classroom. 7 had been paid ahead of time to be actors. 1 was a naive participant. And the teacher would put 2 cards on the front desk. 1 card had 1 line, and the other had 3 lines, 1 shorter, 1 longer, 1 the same. And beginning with the paid actors, one by one, they would say that the shorter line was equal to the first line. And by the time it got around to the 8th naive participant, 30% of them would deny their own eyes to fit in with the group. They're looking at the lines. They are not equal. But yet they would doubt their perception. Well, these people must know more than I do. And so they would go along with the group. Now, if only one of the other 7 objected, it went from 30% down to 5%. But this fear of being rejected from a group is very powerful. And so if they can manufacture your perception of what the group is going along with. And so Joseph Goebbels was the Nazi minister of propaganda, and he studied Edward Bernays. And so he said, people will do what they see other. So he would orchestrate these Colosseum events with 100,000 people. And they would begin to give the Hitler salute in the front. And it would work its way back like a wave at a football game. And as it's getting closer to you, you'd see it coming and you'd feel pressure to give the salute. And then people would see you giving it and they would feel pressure to give the salute. And everybody would leave the stadium thinking, well, I guess everybody's in on this Nazi stuff because I saw them all giving the salute, where they may not have been in favor of it. And so it was this manipulation of your perception of what the group is believing, and you feel a subconscious impulse to comply. Anyway, so it's now with AI, they found University of Zurich did a study of Reddit users, and they built a profile on each user, and they found out that AI bots were 6 times more effective at getting people to change their views than humans are. In other words, every interaction you do with the internet is studying you. Every question you ask ChatGPT, it's studying you. It's building a profile on you. And its goal is to find out your positive and negative motivations, your fears, your pleasures, your pains, your desires. And then gradually, they can manipulate you. They can feed you stories. They can, and it will cause you to move in a certain political direction. And these are powerful tools. They can get a boy to think he's a girl. They can make you wear something on your face that you don't know why. They can make you inject something in your body. They can say, well, if you say anything against something, like as soon as the Ukraine war started, anybody that spoke out against it, you're canceled. It's like, you know what? But you see it happening today, with different movements, and so these are powerful tools, and so with AI, it's going to get even a greater ability to deceive, and so that's why it's incumbent upon each of us to realize, no, we have to do deep dive studying and be aware that once you watch a video. It knows how many seconds you're watching a video, and if you're scrolling and you're slowing down while you're scrolling, it says, well, you must be interested in this content, and it'll go out and gather more of that same content and put it in your feed, and so it'll reinforce you in your where you'll come away with, gee, everybody's going along with it. No, maybe they're not. Maybe it's just feeding you continual information that to create. So we're a government from the consent of the governed. Mm-hmm. But what if you could engineer consent of the governed? And so Edward Bernays wrote a book called The Engineering of Consent. Jeez, man. Manipulation of the opinions of the masses is one of the primary elements of a democratic society, but it's talking about manipulating your opinion through what you think everybody else is going along with. So once you're aware of it, you can sort of spot it. Somebody did I think it was one of the media groups that collected the television stations of the news media saying, beware of forwarding emails because this is very dangerous to democracy.
And they were all saying the same thing on 20 different channels. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like, you know what? I think you're the one that's a danger to democracy. And then there's one when J.D. Vance was announced as Trump's running mate. And everybody's saying that J.D. Vance is weird. Kamala Harris, he's just weird. And Tim Walz, he's just weird. And it's like, all of a sudden, that's like and then when the South African president was confronted about the killing of people in South Africa, they said, oh, the president did an ambush, another ambush in the Oval Office. Trump ambushed the president. So, and then another one was the Democrat convention. And they said, it was electric. Oh, there was electricity in the air. It was like, but it's like, they just get the memo. Yeah. And so when you realize that the majority of the mainstream media is owned by just a couple companies, you have these huge like BlackRock and Vanguard and where they own stock in these companies. And so these are mega corporations that, we think, oh, well, we'll flip the channels and look at them, but the majority of them are owned by the same people. And that's why, we have to go to alternative media. And that's why what you're doing is so important.
I got to throw this out there because I've covered it a couple of times on this show, but it links in just succinctly with what you were saying about the Korean War vets, because I was looking this guy's name up during the COVID fiasco. His name's Albert Bitterman. He was a psychiatrist, I can't recall, in the 50s on into the 70s. But he wrote his first paper on this, I believe, in like 1958. But what he was doing is he was interviewing POWs from the Korean War after they had come back and trying to understand why they cracked, to your point, what you were saying. And he came up with what's called the Bitterman coercion chart. I'll put it on the screen for the people. But it goes into the different methods to control or to break a prisoner there. And he says isolation, hold on, let me zoom in so I can see it. Not that much. Monopolization of perception. Monopolization of perception. Sorry, I'm still sick. Monopolization of perception, humiliation, degradation, exhaustion, threats, occasional indulgences, demonstrating omnipotence, and forcing trivial demands. So, I was thinking about that when the COVID fiasco was going on, because that's exactly how they were breaking the populace. They were doing it was a checklist of the Bitterman coercion chart, which ended up getting used by the U.S. Army in, I think 1964. Amnesty International ended up exposing it in, I think, 1973. And then in Guantanamo, they were using this, 20 years ago. And it's the same blipping chart. And I'm like, the American people probably don't have any idea that they're getting psyoped from Bernays, from folks like Bitterman, and even into that second book, that monopolization that you were mentioning from Edward Bernays too.
Yeah. I actually, talked to several military people, and they said that it's part of the training where they want to, break a new recruit down so that they can rebuild them as part of a unit. Yeah. And, you can see, okay, a fighting unit on the battlefield, that we want them to think, and be committed to each other so they can fight. But once you have that concept hijacked and used to push these alternative ideologies. So one of the classic definitions of war is from Karl von Clausewitz, 19th century military theorist. And he said, the purpose of war is to get your opponent to submit to your will. Pretty simple.
Yeah.
All the battles and guns and training is all to do what? To get your opponent to submit to your will. And then Sun Tzu's Art of War, 5th century BC, said supreme excellence in a commander is to get your enemy to submit without a fight. So if you make them think that they're weaker than they are and you're stronger than you are, you get them confused, demoralized, disoriented, and so now it's a psychological war. And then there's what's called 5th generation warfare, where you get your enemy to submit to your will without them even being aware there is a war. If the goal is to get them to submit, why even wake them up and let them know there's a war going on? You just get them into fear, and they'll panic and surrender their freedom for security. All right, and so these, so this is what we've been experiencing: is this 5th generation warfare, where we're giving up our freedoms, and we don't realize that when you zoom out, we're moving back into this controlled agenda. So there are globalists, and they want a one world government. They want to censor everybody's speech worldwide. They want to, get everybody into panic and fear. The climate change thing was created to try to get a global fear going. I think that to a certain extent, the alien thing might be part of this psyops to get everybody into this fear. Well, okay, we all got to panic and surrender freedoms. I don't, but I mean, the health scare, Brock Chisholm was the first director of the World Health Organization. And he said, to achieve world government, it is necessary to remove from the minds of men their national patriotism. So they want to deride anybody that wants to defend their nation and say, well, you're bad if you're willing to defend your nation. That's why they hate Trump, because he wants to make America great again. No matter what anybody thinks about him, he is not a globalist. He is not a one world government guy. He's a make America great guy. And so he's standing in the way of their globalist agenda. But there's a battle going on. And if America were ever, and I do point out how unique Trump is. I ran for Congress 3 times. I had to raise millions of dollars. Didn't win, but came close. But to run for president, you have to have billions of dollars. And it's a relatively small pool of individuals that have that. And if you don't have that amount of money, you have to go to those that have it and trade. Say, okay, you give me your money and I'll vote for your agenda. And so Trump didn't have to do that. And the tricks they do, I mean, who else could cough up $450 million for a bogus fine for listing your property more than it's worth? I mean, everybody that sells a house lists it for more, figuring you're going to get talked down. Anyway, but anyways, but there are globalists, and they want to get people into fear to surrender freedoms, and anyway.
It seems so weird to me. It's very analogous to like the struggle sessions, because you see so much of this online now, especially where it's exactly how you describe with the Bernays stuff. It's like, you don't think that, do you? And then all these ridicule comes, and they public shame you on the proverbial town square now if you believe X or believe Y, and it's all very algorithmically controlled. So I mean, if you're on the left, it's going to feed you a certain thing. On the right, it's going to feed you a certain thing, and either way, it's the struggle session again. It's kind of pushing people into that funnel of right left paradigm. You can only think in this very duality sort of way. It's really bizarre.
Yeah, they actually want a radical left and a radical right, so they can pit them against each other and create domestic crises. Exactly. And so these tactics were They were actually used during the colonial era. In 1714, the British founded a trading post in Bengal, and the trading post turned into a trading fort, turned into them having guns, turned into them siding with one kingdom and giving them guns, but then later siding with another kingdom and giving them guns, and then stirring up animosity between the kingdoms. And they would fight each other and bloody and weaken each other, and then the British could easily conquer both of those weakened kingdoms. And they did this again and again until they took over all of India, a quarter of the world's population. They tried doing it in America during the Revolution. And you have British General Johnny Burgoyne meeting with the Mohawk Indians, promising them money for scalps. And it was so bad, it's even listed in our Declaration as one of the reasons we were rebelling. The king has incited the native of our frontiers, whose merciless rule of warfare is an indistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. And then during the War of 1812, the British at Pensacola promised gold to the Creek Indians for scalps. And so the Creek Indians attacked Fort Mims, Alabama, and scalped 500 people. But here you have, even when the Belgians were colonizing the Congo, and the people saw themselves as one, and they would measure them and their features and their height, and they would say, you're a Hutu and you're a Tutsi, and made them go down to the government offices and register as a Hutu or a Tutsi. And then once they identified with those two, they would pit them against each other to fight and even genocide each other. And then the colonizing power could easily take over the whole country. And so this tactic is now called the Color Revolution. And so China, when Mao Zedong was taking over, he wanted to divide the country. So he said all of the business owners, property owners, educated people, they're part of the Black Party. And all the hardworking farmers, they're part of the Red Party. And they would portray the red as good and the black as bad. And they wanted to get this division so that they could have, this fighting and take away all the land and so forth. And so in the Cold War, you would have color revolutions in Europe and Ukraine, all these different countries. And so after World War II, you had countries in Europe wanting to be free and have republics and elect leaders. And the KGB didn't like that. And so they would send agents into the countries to do what's called critical theory. They'd simply observe all the groups, ethnic groups, economic groups, racial groups, and they would classify them as victims and oppressors, haves and have-nots. Mm-hmm. And then they would stir up animosity between them. And they actually wanted there to be bloodshed because then people panic and think emotionally and they want to blame somebody for the bloodshed. And then they co-opt the media to blame the leader of the country. And as the negative media portrays the leader bad, his popularity falls. And then they could do a coup or a rigged election and nobody would question it because by this time nobody liked the leader and they would replace him with a Soviet puppet. And so country after country would fall. And so it's called the Cold War. The CIA learned how to do it in reverse. And for 50 years, this was basically the theme of every James Bond movie, right? Some third world country, and there's the KGB, and there's the CIA, and they're wanting to do an assassination and flip the country's government. And then Obama turned it all inward on America for political reasons. In 2014 and 15, I think it was the Smith-Mundt Modernization Act, which allowed the government to be able to manipulate the media for the country and do psyops on the country. And then Obama signed the Countering Foreign Propaganda and Disinformation Act, which gave him the authority to decide what's foreign disinformation, what's not, and censor it, right? And then Obama signed an executive order saying using behavioral science insights for the benefit of the American people. It's like, what's behavioral science insights? Oh, learning how people make decisions and manipulating them for the sake of national security. Mm-hmm. And so what our CIA, was doing in other countries, ostensibly for patriotic purposes, right? We didn't want countries to be in the Soviet orbit, and we wanted them to be in our orbit. But Obama took all these tools and now turned them inward on America. And I think Trump's been trying to clean house, but they are so embedded that this deep state is not, it's still there. And so it's understanding that that's what the importance of alternative media, and that's what you're doing. And so I appreciate you having me on.
It's so wild. I think you're reading my mind, Bill, because you were talking about Barack Obama, and before you were talking about that with the community organizer is the word that kept popping in my brain, because that's in essence exactly where he came from, as a quote unquote community organizer. But to your point, it's just a rabble rouser. Excuse me. To go in and sow division and to separate elements of the culture or aspects of the culture. And it kind of goes back to something else. Project Camelot was something, I believe it was 1964, but it was started at American University, where they had the social sciences departments come together to try to better understand how to take over in Vietnam. But it was pulling in all those social elements and figuring out, okay, we got an economist, anthropologist, sociologist, psychologist, political scientist. How can we better take over the people? And that sounds a heck of a lot like what was going on with Barack Hussein Obama, where he was trying to use those same sort of tactics, not foreign, but domestically, against the American people. Yeah.
By the way, I have a book called Socialism, The Real History from Plato to the Present. And then the subtitle is How the Deep State Capitalizes on Crises to Consolidate Control. And my website's AmericanMinute.com. So that's where a lot of the stuff that I'm talking about is drawn from.
I'll put it on the screen right now for the listeners while you're talking about AmericanMinute.com. That's what you're seeing right now, folks.
Yeah. And then the book is Socialism, The Real History from Plato to the Present. Plato was the first one that talked about everybody owning everything in common. And it sounds good until you think it through. Somebody has to be in the government handing out the common stuff. And they're always going to be tempted to give a little extra to their family and friends on the side and hold back from someone they don't like. And before you know it, it gets discretionary. And the saying is, he who holds the purse strings has the power. So every attempt at everybody owning everything equally always ends up with a deep state bureaucracy passing out favors to their friends, inside trading, and weaponizing the government against their political enemies. And so I go through, the different attempts in the ancient world, and then and it was all theoretical. You have Sir Thomas More writing The Island of Utopia in the early 1500s. This is shortly after Columbus discovered America, and so the word utopia means nowhere, and it's a fictitious island off the coast of South America. And it's a dialogue telling about utopia from a traveler named Hythlodaeus, which means peddler of nonsense. But on this island, everybody owns everything in common, except there's a ruling class that decides who gets what. And he says everybody is tracked everywhere you go with an internal passport. And everything is owned in common. And it's the ruling class that decides who gets what. Everybody lives in identical 3-story housing. They all wear identical clothing. The government decides who gets to have children. Then the government takes the children away from the families and indoctrinates them into becoming the worker class. And so everybody thinks that he wrote it. Sir Thomas More wrote it as a veiled criticism of Henry VIII. And Henry VIII had Sir Thomas More executed. And so then you have Sir Francis Bacon, and he writes The New Atlantis, because Plato had referred to Atlantis as the ideal structured society, and he viewed democracy as unstructured chaos. And so Sir Francis Bacon has a fictitious island in the South Pacific that's structured a little more scientific careers, but the government decides everything. And somebody wrote a satire on that, Jonathan Swift's Gulliver's Travels.
Yeah. Okay.
And the word Gulliver means gullible traveler. And he's washed up on an island where everything is structured. There's a ruling class, all the elites, and there's a commoner working class. And then this is around the time that the Pilgrims are settling America. And they had no money. So they went to the Virginia Company, which branched off to the London Company, and they lent money to the Pilgrims with a company bylaws. And the bylaws said everything would be owned in common for 7 years. Everything got by cooking, hunting, fishing, trading, and it shall go into ye common stock. And everyone's livelihood shall come out of ye common stock. And William Bradford said they tried it for a couple years and almost starved to death. He said the young man objected to having to do twice as much work as the old guy, but got paid the same. And the old guy objected to being classed in labor with the younger ones and considered it a indignity. And the women objected to having to wash other men's clothes. And nobody wanted to plant corn. And they starved through the winter. And then William Bradford said, after much discussion, it was decided that every family would get their own plot of land. This made all hands more industrious. The women now went willingly into the field to plant corn, while before they would allege weakness, and to have compelled them would have been thought great oppression. So it's like, okay, they tried this communism, everything in common. They scrapped it. And you get your own plot of land. And then there's the French Revolution. And so their motto is liberty, equality, fraternity. It sounds good, doesn't work. Liberty and equality are experienced individually, and fraternity is their word for socialism. It's the collective, it's the group, it's the mob, it's the state. And when the benefit of the collective outweighs the benefit of the individual, the collective can crush your individual liberty and freedom, take away all your personal property and redistribute it and kill you. And so you have people like Jean-Jacques Rousseau, considered the father of the French Revolution. He says, when the state says that it's expedient for the state that you should die, you ought to die, because your life is a gift made conditionally by the state. Right? And then that inspired Karl Marx and Hegel. And Hegel said, the state is God walking on earth. The state is our mortal God. All the worth which the human being possesses, he possesses only through the state. And so once you get rid of God and rights that come from a God, and the government's purpose is to guarantee to you your creator-given rights, if there's no God, your rights come from the state, from the group, from the collective. And what the group giveth, the group can taketh awayeth. And so that's why you had, John F. Kennedy in his inaugural address said the rights of man come not from the generosity of the state, but from the hand of God. And so without God, the government transitions from your servant to your master. Instead of the government standing in front of your house, protecting it like a policeman, the government's in front of your house, keeping you a prisoner in your house. And so on Memorial Day, we appreciate the men and women that gave their lives for our freedom. And then America is unique because a declaration, all men are endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. And so it's the creator giving them. It's not the government giving them. And so
sounds perfect. Might be a perfect spot to leave us today, man. I love talking to you. I got to talk to you again when you come out with that new book about more on the psychological thing. I love getting into that information.
Yeah, it's eye-opening. You know, a water molecule is individual, but you put it with other water molecules and they operate as a group. A fish in a bowl, but you put it with other fish and they operate as a group. A bird in a cage, but you put it with other birds, they operate as a group. Well, guess what? We're individuals, but you put us with other individuals and we operate as a group. We're constantly giving and receiving feedback. Are we being accepted or rejected? And so once they, Sigmund Freud studied group psychology. And it's like people will want to move with the group. And so if they can get affect your perception of what the group is believing and doing, and like the fashion industry is based on this, then they can get you to go along with it, and you don't even know. A successful psyop is you don't even know you're psyopted. You just feel like, okay, well, I'm doing what everybody else is doing, and I'm fitting in, right? But it's all manufactured. There's one story in the Bible of Peter with a group around a fire, and a girl gets in his face and says, "You were with Jesus." And you can just picture Peter looking around the fire, and everybody's eyeing him. And he realizes he's about to get kicked out of this group. And he says, "I never met the guy." Like, that's it, Peter? You were with him a couple hours ago and you denied him that quick? I mean, it is a real fear to be kicked out of a group, a family group, a professional group, an online group. It hurts to have somebody cancel you and lie about you online. That hurts. But after the resurrection, the Sanhedrin calls Peter in and said, "We gave you strict orders not to speak in that name, or we're going to kick you out of our group, the synagogue." Mm-hmm. And Peter said, "We must obey God rather than men." It's like, whoa, what happened to Peter? He doesn't care about being kicked out of a group. He's filled with the Holy Spirit. There's something about the Holy Spirit that you don't care about pleasing anybody else. All you care about is pleasing God. Reminds you of Sam Coonrod, the Giants pitcher, was the only player not to kneel in protest when they were doing the kneeling in protest to the flag. And afterwards they asked him why. He said, "Well, I'm a Christian. I just believe you're not supposed to kneel in front of anybody but God." And then there's Jonathan Isaac. He's an Orlando Magic forward basketball player, and he was the only one not to kneel. And they asked him afterwards why. He says, "We're all created in the image of God. The gospel is for everybody," right?
That's right.
It's only when you have a relationship with God do you not care about. But if you don't have that, all you have, most of the world calls it honor or shame culture. Your worth is dependent on being accepted by a group, and you fear being rejected. And but we're supposed to be freed from that by the gospel. So.
That's so true. I'm glad you left us on a spiritual note, man. I was going to try to go in that direction. I'm glad you read my mind again. You took it right to the Bible, to the cross. I love that. Thank you.
Well, hey, thank you, John, and appreciate you having me on again. AmericanMinute.com is my website.
Putting that on the screen again for everybody.
And the book I talked about a whole lot is called Socialism, The Real History from Plato to the Present.
And that's going to be the best place for people to get everything you...
Yeah, and I send out emails, history emails. Like I said, we did one on a series on the Barbary Pirate Wars, did one on the history of Iran, but fascinating stuff they can sign up for at AmericanMinute.com.
That sounds beautiful. Well, thank you so much. If you'll stick around for a second, I'll close up and say goodbye to you off there.
All right.
All right. Thank you so much. Well, folks, if you missed any of that, please check out anomicage.com. You can rewind it, take notes. I'm going to do the same thing. There's a couple things I need to take notes on here, too. So, as I always say, you can't do everything, but you can do something. Please try to get out there, do your part, make a difference, and get with your family. Have a good day today. It's Memorial Day. Thank you, folks. I'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to The Anomic Age, a John Age project. For past shows, further info, and to comment, go to anomicage.com. That's ANOMICAGE.com. Till next time, thank you for listening to The Anomic Age.
Thank you.